You have decided to build a fintech product. But now comes the hard part, hiring the right team. Should your first hire be a product manager or compliance expert? Do you need dedicated fintech developers or can your existing tech team handle it? And how do you actually convince top fintech talent to join a non-financial brand? Today I'm joined by Morten Laufer, a fintech recruiter based in Hamburg, who works with fintech companies and non-financial brands to build their fintech teams. We discuss why product managers with fintech experience should be a first hire, why compliance is your critical third hire that most companies overlook, and how to position your opportunity to attract talent from the fintech world. My name is Lars Markel, and this is the Embedded Finance Review podcast. Every 2 weeks, I'm interviewing the builders and shapers of embedded finance. And a quick reminder from my side, at Embedded Finance Review, I publish weekly newsletters, bi-weekly podcasts, and host in-person and virtual industry events. You can find all of this on my website, embeddedfinancereview.com. In addition, I also work with non-financial brands, infrastructure providers, and banks in understanding, designing, and launching their embedded finance products. If you are interested in working with me, visit my website and reach out. And now, let's dive in. Hey Morten, welcome to the podcast. It's great to finally have you. How are you doing today and in what part of the world are you actually located right now?
Hi Lars, happy to be here finally. Where am I? I'm in Hamburg, Germany, and I am in a phone booth in my office.
Amazing. I think, Morten, you just moved from Berlin to Hamburg, so still sitting in the new home.
Yes, indeed. I miss Berlin indeed a little. However, I got settled in very well here. I am originally from Hamburg, back to family and back to the roots. And I have to say it is not as cool as Berlin, but perhaps a little prettier.
I'm also from the Hamburg area and it's not that far, so can easily combine the two cities. But Morten, today we want to dive into the whole topic of recruiting, team building in the world of embedded finance. And what we want to focus on is non-financial brands when they venture into the fintech space, how should they deal with hiring and all of that. Maybe first thing, you as a fintech recruiter also started fintech recruiting for fintech companies initially and then ventured more into the embedded finance world and help non-financial brands hiring their fintech talent. From your perspective, do you have a preference of working with one or the two? Is there any difference for you?
It's definitely different. I started off working primarily for fintech companies, hiring for them. And the upside of that is, and was, it's more about fit and timing because they know the context. So it is well encapsulated in the first call you have, right? They tell you, they describe the job description, some find the scene, key insights, and then I do my job. And that's fun. That's pretty straightforward. Great way to learn. But what happens with non-financial brands, it's a lot more about translation. So helping them understand why fintech hires think differently about, for example, risk, regulation, iteration. And it's a bit more bridging to cultures. I can imagine it's, I don't know, maybe you have that as well, right? You're often the one coming in knowing fintech with non-financial brands. And the part I really like about it is I feel I'm a bit less of a CV delivery machine and a bit more consultant, like they want my insights a bit more. And obviously I'm not necessarily the right person to draw up your new fintech top line generating product, but there is a bit more, it needs more translation, it needs more knowledge, and that's fun.
Understood. So it sounds like you just more, maybe not consulting itself, but basically being a little bit of a sparring partner as well to help design the right package, the right role, the right offering, even though that might also be, of course, like more work on top for you where a fintech company might be very well knowing where they're getting to.
Yes, you need more meetings, but I feel more needed, and that's always great for people, right? I feel like I can contribute a bit more as I can share a couple of things I've learned over the past 7 years in fintech and some of the experience I've had. And when I speak to fintech founders, they have more experience than me, obviously, from a topical point of view. Their knowledge is just way more in depth, but they've oftentimes just have also had more hires in that space, right? So on the other hand, I feel like I can contribute more.
Of course. But Morten, let's maybe dive into a little bit of a, let's say, a practical example. Let's just, not a specific company, but let's just made up. There's a non-financial brand, maybe a B2B SaaS company that has decided they want to now venture into the world of financial services and start building their first embedded finance product. And now they realize, or they want to hire the first person. From your experience dealing with such companies or generally non-financial brand, what is usually the first hire that such a company does when it comes to the fintech team?
what they usually do or what they should do, because
Let's start with what they usually do.
Yeah, I think usually they do the right thing. I've seen mostly people being hired who have a product management background or who have set up products, because that's what it's essentially about, I believe. And the difficulty here sometimes is obviously finding someone who has a product mindset. And when I say product manager, I'm saying deliberately product manager, not product owner. You need someone who can also bridge business goals, right? Because generally, I believe it is top line growth, or you want to have this fintech product, this embedded product add something to revenue, I guess. And you will need to build a product, or maybe you buy it. But either way, I believe product managers, best case scenario with fintech exposure, who can translate business goals and regulation and everything else to this. That should be your first hire. I think you might want to have more than one at the beginning, but either way.
Yeah. And I'm also thinking right now, right? I mean, I guess we always talk about, right, like embedded finance as like one word, but obviously it's very broad. A lot of different financial products involved, a lot of different industries. But I totally agree. Obviously, the first one is, or very soon needs to be building a product. So the product background is really necessary. But then it also often means, like, I mean, the next question that brings me to is like a little bit like, how do you know what kind of fintech talent you really need, right? I mean, obviously, we're talking about the B2B SaaS companies. I mean, maybe they know already or decided already what financial product they want to do. And that means, okay, they can narrow down the person, what kind of experience they maybe should have had in their past, right? But obviously, it's what you don't know, right? It's a bit of a challenge here, right? So is there any more like advice you would give somebody when hiring the first team? Like what should before basically writing the first job ad and getting out there to hire the first person?
Yes, I mean, I have had the pleasure of once or twice also working with you, coming into an environment where you have already laid the groundwork, and obviously much better groundwork when it comes to expertise and knowledge than I could ever do. But I think it's great to have, if you have absolutely no idea of fintech and have it in-house, I think it's good to have someone look over it, maybe a consultant, a consultancy, just to get an idea of, is it, because I mean, embedded banking, finance is huge, right? Payments, lending, wallet, whatever you want to do. And I think you should, at the very least, before you start hiring, narrow that one down. Because I think as every fintech listener will understand, it's a whole different ballpark if you're hiring for someone doing embedded payments, or as everyone is doing right now, lending, right? So to answer your question, get someone in who knows a bit more than you to help you draw that up. And I might even start not with me, but with someone like you, get someone with actual domain expertise.
And then the companies you are talking to, who like the non-financial brands you have helped in the past with hiring their fintech talent, did they come straight away to you, or did they like? What I'm just thinking, right? Like, what's the normal for somebody who has no contact points with the fintech world and maybe doesn't have an advisor or investor with any kind of like connections to the world of financial services? I mean, might be happening lesser and lesser because there are so many connections. But let's just assume that's the case. What's the right way then, even to like find the talent? I mean, the obviously one is hire Morten as a fintech recruiter with that network. But if that is not an option, is there any other suggestions or approaches how to find the talent?
I mean, a lot of first people on the ground kind of talent bases exist around VCs, right? So people who have investors obviously are oftentimes in touch with them. There's often the push from their side to, hey, let's try to get into fintech as well here if we can, because we all know lifetime value, customer lifetime value can be great, and there's so much upsell. And then oftentimes they already know people. They can connect you to people, right? And that's obviously when you're lucky, when you chose the right VC. They are not just there to ask you how you're doing and expect numbers, but they're perhaps also using their environment, their setup, their connections to connect you to the right people, perhaps even in their portfolio. So those are things I've seen definitely. If you then want to hire the right people, if you have a good in-house recruitment team, I mean, I hope that they might be able to also go out and find the right people and put in the right keywords in LinkedIn. It's sometimes that easy. I think the evaluation of that talent, so you might get into interviews, but the evaluation of that talent will be super difficult if you don't have someone in the room roughly understanding what you're trying to do. And you will never be fully capable of understanding what someone is able to do in an interview, which is something I always like to stress. But you can have a couple of tips and tricks here. But yeah, answering your question, people like me, good in-house recruitment team, but best case scenario, find someone through a network of yours, maybe VCs, whoever, investors, who have also the intrinsic motivation, the shared motivation that you will do well with this.
And then I really want to ask this question. Do you also like interact with or have interacted with companies who kind of thought they can do it without a recruiter first and then came to you realizing it wasn't really successful because they didn't have that experience?
Yeah, quite often. I mean, best case scenario, they were just not able to find the right person and get them into interviews or hire them. Worst case scenario, I get calls and they have tried out 6 months, 9 months with maybe the wrong profile, maybe the wrong race simply. And I might not be always the right person to tell you if the way is the right one. I specialize on finding hopefully the right person for it. But yes, that has happened. And I think it is oftentimes very costly. So obviously recruiters will tell you everything in order to get the job. But I think one of the things we like to tell that is actually true is opportunity costs are huge. So not placing a position, or even worse, and I think most companies by now know that, placing it with the wrong person is incredibly costly, oftentimes a lot more costly than paying the right recruiter to find hopefully the right person.
I totally agree with that. And I mean, this might be now specifically relevant for non-financial brand building fintech products, but it might be also for other new things. I could now mention AI as an example. A company wants to go into AI, doesn't have the staff on board, and the CEO, the leadership is really trying to source the right talent, but also in embedded finance, right? If you are made the decision or you know that you have to move forward, but you are not able to hire the right person, it takes 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. Obviously, your competition that you might have seen already, maybe before starting with it already, will move ahead further and further, because without the right talents, you will not make valuable and crucial movement towards your goal, right?
Yes, 100%. Nothing to add.
And Morten, you did mention also the point of evaluating the talent, right? And that's also what I want to come to right now, because obviously, again, we're talking here about the first hire, the company who knows who wants to build a financial product and knows they need to build up the team. And I'm guessing, or we all know, maybe the second, the third, the fourth hire is very different already when you have the first people on board already who, by that point of time, understand your business very, very well and obviously have this deep expertise of financial services. But how do you do the evaluation of the first hire? I mean, I would assume in the best case scenario, you have an investor, you have a board member, you have an advisor who can help with that. But the question is also, of course, like, how well does this person understand your company? If it's an investor, then it's maybe a very simple one, advisor, board member, maybe as well. But if you rely on other people, then also the question, like, how much can they bring the two things together and help with that, right? Have you seen any other like approaches for companies evaluating the first fintech hire?
I think this will then go more into a discussion how you evaluate people in general, because I have not seen like the fintech industry having some specifics in there. Those are all around expertise and knowledge. And I think for that part, it's good to have either a recruiter like me who checked that before or someone in the room like you. In the end, I believe specifically for first hires, it's super important when you're trying to bridge new business models or merge them, pattern recognition. So someone who's seen how regulated systems behave, obviously fintech being a highly regulated system, and can teach you in that interview how to think that way, because if they can teach you in that interview or give you at least insights, they will do the same with the rest of the organization, hopefully with the people they bring in who might not have that background. And then it really comes down a bit to what you're interested in, right? I always believe a good first hire has risk, like they're risk aware. Obviously, we're in fintech, but you need also someone who is confrontatious, maybe the wrong word, but they need to carve out a niche in that company, right? They will need so much cooperation to make this work. So I usually like to have people explain to me what they've done successfully and unsuccessfully, and perhaps how they would approach the first 2 or 3 months in that position themselves, because generally that gives you a good idea.
Got it. And maybe before moving towards more building the whole team after the first hire, maybe come back to the question at the beginning when I asked you like the difference between like non-financial brands and fintech companies. When you work with non-financial brands now who have hired the first person and maybe continued build a team around it, do you feel like the difference between the two companies is reducing and it gets a lot more for you as personally working then with a non-financial brand who has a complete team stuff? It feels a lot more like working with a normal fintech, or is there still remains a difference?
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes when you build software B2B, there's just tons of similarities. And specifically the teams, they are very similar. The biggest difference, and something that I've seen so many companies here in Germany specifically not wrap their head around correctly, is just compliance. Fintech just needs so much more compliance. So if you start with a product manager, you get tech lead on board, or you use one of the existing resources, I almost think your third hire could, even if it's just fractional part-time, someone who understands compliance of the topic, of the fintech topic you want to try to get into. Once money moves, you look at ops. Once you have a bit scale, data is important. But I think many of the players in the market that are doing rather well, and you know them potentially even better than me, but I'm thinking about Weaver or Swan, and maybe in their origin markets or the first markets, they tried to look at compliance, at least from the positions that went over my desk that we were looking for. So that's, I think, one of the biggest differences. People just underestimate compliance. And if you do not get the right groundwork in, you will be massively stopped down the line. Maybe Solaris or N26 constantly running into these problems, massively hindering their growth. And maybe a positive example would be Raisin, right? I remember there were so many compliance positions, risk management positions they were looking at, where you felt they were just getting ready to then do their hyper-growth sprint. And then they were able to do that, kind of setting the rails, another word that everyone likes these days. But yeah, kind of building those rails and then being able to accelerate.
Makes sense. And I just wanted to make the case when you spoke about compliance before you mentioned maybe N26 and Solaris, that maybe the fintech teams have like more experience with compliance, and they definitely have more experience with compliance. So then maybe there's less of a problem for them building the teams. But obviously, as we all know, there's a lot of complexity in it. Knowing is one thing, but then doing the right thing is completely.
Specifically in Germany, right? I mean, everyone who had contact with BaFin, I think, can agree that it is a very deliberate and specific kind of institution and needs a specific way of handling it. And if you want to be successful, you will get in touch with them one way or another. And it's good to do it on good terms.
Of course. So I wanted to come to, you kind of answered it partially already, but I wanted to come to we discussed the first hire that many companies maybe do when building their fintech teams or starting their efforts in the world of financial services. And I guess that person is also being a little bit the explorer, starting into this field, trying to understand what's possible, what's not, and what direction do we have to go. And obviously that person will set a lot of the things that will follow after that. But then, of course, at one point, the team needs to grow, right? It needs to hire more people. And I think you made, of course, a very strong case already for a compliance person coming in there. And I think where I totally agree with you is that, it depends a lot. Embedded finance is very broad, right? So what kind of financial product and how are you building it? Are you being regulated yourself? Do you don't need maybe a license for the specific product you want to offer? Or maybe you work with a partner, with an enabler who has the license for you as an umbrella solution baked into their product. But the question, of course, always remains you should, and this is not just for compliance, but also for other things, there should be a good understanding of those things also in-house, and you should not rely completely on providers that you work with and rely maybe for a POC, for a proof of concept, maybe for the first kind of iterations, maybe it works. But obviously, once you want to build the product a lot more around the needs of your customers and make changes and understand here and there, then obviously it's crucial as well to understand compliance. But are there other roles besides compliance where you say they have an equal relevance, or is it really this knowledge around compliance is really important? The companies you work with, non-financial brands, when they hired the generalist, when they hired the product manager initially, what was a common second, third, fourth, fifth hire from your perspective?
Yeah, you need someone for technical implementation, right? You need someone who understands APIs, which is hopefully something that, not hopefully, it's something that more and more people do.
Would you say, have you seen it often that people then hire? Obviously, these companies are B2B. Very often they're software companies, especially those you work with. So they obviously have a tech team before already. But do you still see them that they hire technicals?
I'm afraid I'm overstepping my expertise here because, yes, I'm not a techie at all. I've heard from people that it has bitten them afterwards, not hiring also someone technical who has seen the fintech world. Because that's usually, right, you have resources in-house, you're a B2B software company, it doesn't matter, but you have a tech team, so you use that capacity. And that's obviously the right way of doing it, specifically at the beginning, I believe. But there are seemingly, as I was told, a lot of differences, and it can be very useful to make sure you have technical know-how of that domain that you're trying to embed into your existing product, obviously.
And from my experience, there are definitely a lot of cases where I would agree. I mean, maybe not all the time everywhere, but I guess it depends a lot on, again, like the product you're building, the way how you're building it, and so on. But if embedded finance is not just like one feature that you want to implement and it's part of a bigger strategy where you maybe want to do other things as well, it's definitely helpful to have somebody who has done it before, because specifically when it comes to provider selection, because even if you go for your own license, you still need other providers. It's never you build it fully in-house. It's just different kind of providers that you're working with. And obviously that's knowledge, the technical implementation, which is really important as well for picking the right providers in many cases. So
yeah, there's something else. If you split someone's time, you oftentimes split their impact, right? And this is something that highly motivates people and gets them to do things. And I feel like when you have a tech team that is obviously working on the things they have been working on before, and suddenly there is a new stakeholder trying to get some of their time and is fighting for capacity of working on it, I don't think that is a nice thing for the fintech product lead, whoever, or the embedded product lead that is fighting for resources. It is also not really a great situation to be in for a tech team that now has a hard time figuring out how do I split my time, my resources, and oftentimes it's half-assed. So dedicated teams often help, obviously, knowing what they're supposed to do.
Yeah. And from a talent perspective, how do you see the market? What I'm just thinking about is, obviously, you, for sure, me, is very excited about embedded finance. And whenever I see a job ad of a non-financial brand, it may be a B2B software company or some completely different companies, and they are looking to hire fintech staff, I get like super excited about it. Maybe even sometimes even consider maybe I should apply, should reach out to them to kind of be the person who's building these products. But do you think this is applicable to like a lot of people in the fintech world? I mean, you've done a lot of fintech recruiting, right? In a way, I mean, if you're doing this move, like coming back to the first person, or depending on the profile, also the second or the third person who's joining this non-financial brand, you maybe not leaving fintech behind, but you kind of leave a little bit this fintech bubble and you go into something completely different, right? Is it hard for companies to convince these people to make this move, or is it depending if in an interesting industry, it's super easy?
No, I think there's one culprit that companies, non-financial brands, need to navigate very early on, and that is trying to make sure that the project or the idea that they have is an absolute priority and it won't just be for 3 months, right? Because that's the biggest risk for someone moving out of it, is this is an afterthought in 3 months and I'm gone, right? I don't get the resources I need.
Yeah, even worse, like the product is not gone, but it's still there, but it's not being staffed and you hang around for another month or...
Yeah, exactly. So commitment, showing commitment, and not just showing it, actually having it, I think that is the biggest thing that companies need to pay attention to when hiring fintech talent. Generally, fintech talent finds it oftentimes very interesting working for non-financial brands, because one of the main issues with fintech is this still, although yes, we have consolidation everywhere, there is obviously still lots of companies who don't make it, right? Who run on VC fuel and may not have a customer base. And obviously all non-financial brands, maybe not all, but most of them trying to bring embedded banking into their landscape, they have a functioning business model, right? They're oftentimes also the bigger organization. And I think for many people, specifically people building products, it's super interesting to try out something that they like. Fintech people usually stay within fintech, build something in an environment where people actually use their product, right? Because it's already existing. It's an existing landscape that works. So that for people oftentimes is super interesting, right? Metro might be a good example, right? Like you would be building a Metro, like you would be working on a Metro card, and there are already millions of people buying at Metro. So it will be actually used. You're not dependent on some PLG or some salespeople getting it out. Like you build something that's going to be used, and then you can see how to optimize it.
Yeah, of course. I guess it also depends a lot on the background of that talent of that individual and what they have gone through in their past companies. And if access to customers, to markets is obviously something they didn't really experience. And such stories might be even more interesting. Or, of course, there are interesting brands, right? Companies that maybe where people feel like, well, this has always been an interesting brand and interesting company. And now it's my chance to actually work with them and build stuff that I know about. But I want to come back to your first point, and I think it's a really important one, is obviously especially for the first person, maybe lesser for the second or third, but still in a way as well, there's a big risk of making this move, right? That the project, the idea, the strategy of building financial services is not going to work out, or maybe it's not going to work out in the near future, let's say in the next year or two, which would also be catastrophic for the person who's making the move, right? So I'm thinking, You said like you have to, as a company, then kind of paint this believable story that you definitely have the support for this idea for a sufficient amount of time. How can you do that? I mean, like from your perspective, like how can you, like if you have a really like a talent who is like incredibly popular and everybody wants to hire him or her, maybe even also from the fintech world, has offers from everywhere. And now there's this really great company that this person really likes and really wants to work for them. But it's kind of like unsure, what if this project doesn't really get the support in like 2 months when things have changed, right? And before you answer that, my first thinking is, and that's a question for you as well, does it mean, it depends on the size of the company, but does it mean this is a C-level CEO job, maybe if it's like more of a B2B SaaS company and like series, I don't know, A, B, C, something like this, to talk to the person and convince that person that this is something that is of the top priority for the company, or what else can be done?
So the easiest way in order to paint a believable picture is just to be believable, right? Like you actually need to be sure. And when I try and figure out if someone is sure about maybe their job or leaving or whatsoever, I have them explain it to me, right? So being able in an interview process to show some kind of planning, some kind of budgeting, obviously goes a long way. So also for the talent, I would always recommend ask, what's the budget? What do you want to see in 3, 6, 9 months? Tell me about the KPIs. Like try to figure out how much they thought about this and not just, hey, fintech sounds pretty cool. There's lots of money in it. So let's find someone who can hopefully realize it. That's one thing. And if I understood your question correctly, what else can they do? Most people I place who end up doing well and doing great things at times even, they are oftentimes mission and impact driven. So less so money driven. And because if they build something great, money will be there. I think as a company, because you talked about painting a picture of what can be done with their existing backbone, with their customer base, with the environment, the landscape that they've already have built, I think that goes a long way, right? Tease your capability of bringing that product into an actually existing user base. I think that would definitely be something I would always recommend. When you sell this job, make sure other people understand what kind of impact this can have day one or day one of the MVP. I think most people are very much driven by it. Talking about compensation, really difficult to out big tech these days, either way, even more so than a couple of years back. Compensation is important. It will always be. And specifically the kind of first people on the ground, have them be part of their success. It's not sales, I would not call it commission, but have them be part of the transaction volume, whatever it is, right? Like when they bring in revenue, let them build a successful product and set the right KPIs and have them be part of it. Because then you have hopefully an entrepreneur within your enterprise, and they usually tend to do lots of good work and hard work.
Understood. And I'm just thinking if it's really a case, but let's just assume there is an industry, maybe not B2B SaaS because it would be too close to fintech, but there's a completely other industry, maybe more of an offline industry who now wants to build a fintech product. We just spoke about compensation. I think it's a really important one, obviously. Do you think, or would you suggest, I mean, you want to hire fintech people, right? So I guess you have to put your pay, your combination package to be attractive for a fintech person. So you probably align a lot more about the typical salaries for that person in the fintech world, and not so much looking at your own industry. Or what's your take on that?
Yes, obviously you need to know your audience. If you're trying to get people from fintech, you need to understand the fintech industry. I think this is where a good recruiter can actually help a lot. It's otherwise a bit difficult. You might be shocked, or maybe underwhelmed. I don't know where you're from. Maybe you do PE. But I think generally, yes, you need to know your audience. You need to adapt to fintech salaries. They're usually a bit higher than the average salary, obviously, specifically in tech. But I do believe that there can be issues. I've seen it often that companies pay a bit less than what would be usual. I also understand it, right? It's not like, hey, you need to pay up because you have an existing culture, you have an existing salary level, and you can do a lot of harm when you're not truthful to what you told everyone else. So that's why I believe specifically in some key positions, you might set financial incentives with the work, with the results that these people bring in.
Yeah, the last comment you said that I just smile thinking about, I don't know, what was it, like playing football manager back in the days on the computer, and you kind of like want to hire the star player from another team, and then you have to pay substantial salary to get that person, but your existing team is going to look like and say, okay, this is not fair. We built all of this, but obviously this is not black or white or 0 or 1, right? This is obviously something you have to, as a company, solve. And obviously, if you want to hire that talent, and especially the first team members are going to be extremely crucial. I mean, it's like same as building the startup at the very start, but also then building this new effort in financial services. The first hires are extremely crucial of the viability of the success and direction this project can go. So obviously, this should be something where teams don't compromise on that. Okay, Morten, understood the compensation part. Let's move on, or let's come to the part we have now hired the team. The team is building the product. I mean, from your experience dealing with these companies, is there kind of a risk for the non-financial brand of losing some of their team members very early on again, maybe going back to the fintech world or going to other non-financial brands? So what I'm going towards is, we spoke about what a great package maybe looks like and how you can convince the person to leave to build the product with you. Is there specific efforts or risks that you're seeing that this person might be leaving again, or things you should be doing to avoid that?
Not specifically under the fintech umbrella. I think this will
The standard package.
the same for other companies as well. You generally retain people when you have impact and growth or impact and learning. And people want to feel like their work matters, and people want to feel like they're growing or learning. And there might be exceptions to this, obviously. I'm not sure if these are the people you're looking for. Good salary might keep that in check, even if they don't feel like they have an impact or if they're not learning. But then you need to wonder if you need these people if they don't have an impact and they're not learning. So retaining good personnel will always come down to, have you defined work for them, and are you enabling them to do that work and grow alongside with it? And I think this can done well by big companies, small companies, outside of any business unit, does not matter. I think it has potential, which is super interesting when you do embedded banking, because there is a part of entrepreneurship in it, right? You're building something within something existing, and that can be a nice bridge. You feel like this is yours, and yet you have support around it, right? You have a functioning system around it that can maybe also buy you some patience with your work. It's not the only thing that needs to be done well. It's an existing business model that works. So yeah, attention, try to make sure people learn and feel like their work matters.
And that they're building something that they believe in and has value to the customers. Thank you, Morten. This was really insightful. You obviously worked on similar clients in the past, so be in the fractional fintech embedded finance role, you then helping out finding the right staff. So it was great to finally talk here on this podcast about the common things that we're dealing with on these projects. Thanks for joining and sharing your insights. If there's anybody who wants to either hire you or maybe just pick you up for a coffee chat to discuss some ideas, what's a good way to get in touch with you?
I'm on LinkedIn all day,
Surprise.
every day. So that's the easiest. Otherwise, yeah, you will find my contact details there as well. Or yeah, looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you again, Morten. And yeah, until next time. Thank you for listening. If you like this episode, please make sure to follow my podcast in your podcasting app and subscribe to my newsletter. And if you have an interesting embedded finance story to tell, please reach out. Thank you. Until next time.